it's not enough to now turn around and blame our community for not encouraging journalism.
No, I'm not blaming our community. I'm saying that you have to have a fair and balanced view on these things, right? And understand that every conversation I've had with media, different media outlets, is the same. It's not like they're not looking for those voices. Just those voices aren't in supply, right? And the ones that are amazing and they're great, right? Why am I doing this show, right? Is so also I can make my voice heard, right? So that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that somehow that there isn't equal representation. There isn't. Of course there isn't. What I'm saying is that.
But the conversation about representation.
It's very different, Harman, to someone who has their side job or even as a source of income starts a local community newspaper or radio station. That's very different. It's very different to decide that is going to be your vocation, right? If you're a media person who decided, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that media was going to be your vocation, right? That's very, very different, right? And they're not, this is like the conversation about the death of expertise, right? It's like not all voices should be given the same weight, right? And I don't think that it's the same thing that a news station or a newspaper started by a local community person as a side job or truth telling or whatever should be given the same weight as someone who spent 30 years in
Absolutely it shouldn't, Ajit. The person who can actually reflect the realities of lived realities of communities.
So my legal opinion on something should be given the same weight as your legal opinion.
But I think from a journalistic perspective, you're talking about.
So when I have a legal opinion on something because I read a bunch of articles, I should be given the same weight as your legal opinion on that same thing.
I think
you've dedicated your life to your profession. Absolutely, I'm entitled to my opinion, but my opinion definitely should not be given the same weight as your opinion.
This is a false equivalency. You're touching into what is very, very blatantly a false equivalency. When we're talking about journalism and telling the stories and being able to reflect the realities of diverse stories, the media in this country does not reflect the diversity. That is a simple.
I'm not arguing that. That's not what I'm saying.
And to continue that, what I'm saying is, in fact, what you've had in this country is journalists who are now going to be bailed out and provided with government subsidies. Some of these who participated in what was called the appropriation prize. Maybe we go back a bit when we talk about what happened here. Whereas you had people, the media's role is to speak truth to power. Instead, prominent mainstream media that you now want to defer to are the ones who are now mocking efforts to speak out on issues of appropriation and cultural appropriation. So rather than doing the job of speaking truth to power, they're doing the opposite. They were discouraging people from doing that and did it through a satirical approach where they were now talking about issuing an appropriation prize. And now with our government to now support them with subsidization and not have any protections.
It's a whole different conversation. The fact of the state of the media the way that it is and false news and all these kinds of things is a totally different conversation. I totally am not arguing with you, and I think that media has its own issues, and I think independent voices are necessary. That's not the conversation that I'm talking about, and that's a whole different conversation. And absolutely, the problem with media is it's a business, right? That's the problem. That's why they want to take away advertising revenue for the CBC, because otherwise it's always going to be a business and not be that truth to power voice, right? And just like any business, that they're always looking for an audience and they're looking for generating ad revenue. So that's a whole different conversation. And absolutely, should they be subsidized and all these kinds of conversations? And what does that happen in terms of partisanship and their ability to be impartial? Those are bigger conversations. Let's move on to the other.
To me, just to finish off that thought, to me, the important thing from my perspective on this issue is that the question of representation, the question of what media should look like in a country, and what a viable media should look like, includes having diverse voices. And people have to understand that media frames issues, media's frame narratives. So when we look at the issues, whether that's dealing with the current Indigenous blockade issues and the wetland issues, whether we're talking about politicians and how they approach things and how they're able to get away with lies, whether we talk about them being able to enable that, it all comes down to media framing. And so if you're not going to have a hard conversation about the composition of that, talk about the lack of representation within media, that is what now frames so many of these other issues, and that is now the underlying issue. So when you looked at what happened with the Wet'suwet'en, where did the original blockade happen? It happens on their lands. Yet the RCMP doesn't allow the media to attend, doesn't allow the media to be there, doesn't allow the media to see what the RCMP then go and do. And when I went on media,
So is that the media's fault?
so to me, one of the issues
Is that
that I
the
had,
media's fault,
well,
or is that
let me build my,
enforcement and
no,
the
let-
people who
let-
who make the laws and enforce the laws?
let me go forward from this point, which is the big concern that I had was that Canadians in this country should be extremely concerned about the story that they're getting, because you're having media members who are now told not to be able to report from the site of what was happening initially, and yet, you know, there's case law that says that what the RCMP did there was not allowable, which is against Canadian law and the rule of law in this country to prevent access to it. So what happens is there that outrage from the rest of Canadian media that why are we not allowed to now cover the story? No, there's not. There's not the outrage that normally would have happened. You know, Canadian media in this country did side with rebel media to say that they should get their credentials to be able to cover politics and say that they're a news outlet. But is there the same allyship that exists within the media to now push back and say we're not actually being able to access, you know, the site of this blockade to actually get the proper story? No, there's not. So on the one side, why is that? Why is that the case? Why do we see the lack of outrage when it comes to those issues, or the lack of? It all comes back to the fundamental question, Najib. And this is where, if we're not critical of the role that the media plays in framing these stories, we're missing a huge part of the
Right,
context.
so you're getting on a different topic. We're talking about representation in media. I totally agree with you on those conversations, that the media has lost its voice and needs to do more work in that area. But when we're talking about representation, again, going back to politics, right? I mean, we can't keep saying and pointing the fingers at others, saying, you know, why aren't we properly represented in politics or media when we aren't making those a priority in our communities, right? And putting forth our best effort.